practicability evaluation that was done was basically to look at reasonable time frames, you know, for when you would achieve groundwater standards. It wasn't to set an exact time frame, it's to look at relative time frames, because it was based on assumptions. It was based on no attenuation. Well, there's probably some attenuation going on. So I think it would be difficult to come up with an exact time frame. But you know, when you're comparing various alternatives, leaving in place, taking it out, you're using consistent assumptions so that you can compare those alternatives to each other. So the position isn't that it's going to take 100 years regardless. The position is that the conclusion is that we don't think that we can clean it up within a reasonable time frame. Now, that's, you know, whether it's orders of magnitude. Part of the reason that, I mean, part of where we were going with that too is even that 100 years was optimistic. That was assuming you would get all the sources. Well, there's a lot of other sources in the area, so we're not convinced. You know, our position is that we're not convinced that even if you remove the Parrot Tailings, that you would get there.
What's the basis for your statement that EPA would be supportive of the U.S. restoration going through the Parrot Tailings?
Well, because I think that if there are efforts that improve the water quality, you know, even if it doesn't wind up in meeting standards within a reasonable time, you know, efforts to get them out of the way so that you don't have to, anything you can do that you don't have to have limited land use. You know, if you want to pull those materials out of there and put them in a place where they're with other materials, better segregated. I mean, there are other benefits as well. You know, even if it isn't, you know, completely restoring that groundwater in a short time frame.
Were those considered when the decision was made to get them in place?
Although Superfund, you know, in Superfund, there is a distinction between remedy and restoration. I mean, remedy is really designed at protecting public health and the environment. Restoration is more focused on trying to improve the quality of that resource. And that's why we said we'd be supportive, because we're supportive of efforts to improve the quality of a resource or improve a resource or enhance it. But the circle of remedy piece is really focused on protecting public health.
Well, Larry kind of asked my question.
Sorry.
I did find it kind of puzzling that you found it all right to spend restoration dollars on removal of Parrot Tailings, but not remedy dollars. So that kind of makes me think that maybe not officially, but the EPA might think that maybe with some of this new data coming out, that removal of Parrot Tailings would definitely improve groundwater downstream and service.
You know, I think anytime you're looking at trying to further segregate contamination from resources, resources you're trying to protect, I think it's good.
It's all right to spend our
No.
restoration dollars.
This isn't about spending money. This is about goals and objectives. Restoration's objectives are really focused on the natural resource. Superfund, the Superfund cleanup is focused on protecting the environment, protecting public health. So we have to look at trying to find those exposure pathways. Where is the contamination going to get to, either environmental or a human receptor? And then try and either, try and cut off that pathway. It's really focused on protecting people, protecting the environment, not on the resource itself as a resource.
Removal would make everything better.
Well, Sarah.
Well, let me give you an example. Just this year, just so you know this. The power company needed to put a new gas line under the BNSF railroad near Montana Street. And so they bored under the railroad, and they had to dewater to do that boring. And it was highly contaminated. There are tailings from the Civic Center, all the way through LAO. And so, yes, I hear what you're saying about the Parrot Tailings, but we have many other sources. So if you don't address those sources, and they're spread everywhere, if you don't, you still have to collect the groundwater because it's contaminated and treat it. And so I think that's important, that we cannot just look from the agency's point of view, look at the Parrot Tailings, because the contamination comes all the way down the valley. So that's an important part of why we decided on our remedies.
Just a comment, I would say that, I don't speak for every member of the board, but I think that they share the subcommittee concern that we're not just looking at the Parrot. We want to look at everything, and we want to look at it right.
Okay.
And to follow up on that, and this is sort of my personal distaste of why we have to keep coming back to the Parrot, is that it's almost been preordained that this committee is going to have to clean the Parrot because EPA doesn't seem to want to, in light and in face of new data continually from many different sources. Because there is this pittance we've been given. I mean, 28 million is nothing. Look at that map behind it. 1/4 of that map is poison. And that's our community. You don't live here. That's our community. And we have $28 million to try to fix one little hole. I mean, it's almost like, you just said it right at the end. Your closing statement is, if you guys like to clean it, that'd be great. And that's a strong level of personal distaste for someone who lives in this community, who has an opportunity to do something with this community, and has so many goals and objectives we could hit, that everyone is just saying, well, it's almost preordained. We have to go take care of what EPA has consistently been able to find reasons to say needs not to be taken care of. And that's not a question, that was more of a statement. I apologize.
I do have a question.
Are we?
Can we finish? We'll finish with the council and then I'll open it up to the public.
And this probably just speaks to my ignorance of the process. Did I jump on, was it your turn, Chad? You talk about that the cleanup didn't happen under remedy, and there's the criteria for cleanups under remedy. Is it too late for cleanup under remedy for the Parrot Tailings, for all these areas downstream that Sarah talks about, down through where Northwest Board for under the BNSF track? Is it too late at this point to reopen having this taken care of under remedy?
No, I don't, basically where we're at is, the 2006 was a remedy decision. And that means that this is a decision that we need to get implemented, we need to get the remedy constructed, we need to get the remedy operating. At the same time, we're continuing to monitor, we're continuing to evaluate, we're continuing to have these discussions, because if we make a determination that either we're not being protective, we're missing something, if we can't meet standards in the creek and we need to take some additional action, if the groundwater plume is expanding, we're going to have to look at what other things we need to do. But for right now, where we are is trying to get the remedy implemented, doing our monitoring, continuing to work with all the folks involved to, well, even right now, we're trying to work with all the folks involved to make sure that we design all the systems that are supposed to be implemented and get them in place in a manner that attempts to address everybody's concerns. Now, it's not going to make everybody happy, but down the road, if we find that there are areas where either we're not meeting our objectives described in the record decision, one of which is water quality in Silverwood Creek, and others is, not having groundwater expand beyond the contaminated groundwater area. These are some of the things. If our monitoring shows that stuff happens, then that's kind of the point of the 5-year reviews, is to look at those and look at that data. But we don't need to wait for 5-year reviews if we have indications that we're not meeting performance standards. At some point, the responsible parties are going to be held. Once we finally get everything in place, and once we kind of get things to where we think we're meeting standards, if they exceed standards, they're going to be held to potential penalties for violations of standards. So we're not there yet because we need to get everything implemented. We need to get to final resolution. But there is always the opportunity, if something is missed and something's not protected, that we have to address that in the future.
Now, your slides, you talked about meeting the standards under base flow conditions on several slides. Are there storm events, are there conditions where you're not meeting standards? Describe those for me.
Well, storm events for one. You know, there are standards. And when I talk about meeting standards, again, is for most metals total recoverable. Right now, the applicable standard is total recoverable copper, and we are not meeting it. We're meeting it in some cases, but not real consistently. And so, you know, one of the things, you know, so that's what we're looking at. Now we're meeting the dissolved standard, but that's the federal standard, which is different from the state standard. So we are not consistently meeting all the state standards, and that's why we still have more work to do with respect to stormwater. We're still evaluating the collection and treatment systems. We're still monitoring and seeing if there are areas like that Butte Reduction Works area where we can collect additional groundwater and get that out of the contaminated groundwater.
What percent of the time is storm event? Just a sense, I mean,
Well, storm events can, it depends on how it happens. You know, I mean, storm events, I don't know what percent of the time it is. You know, there's short duration. You know, when a storm comes, it's a short duration. There's two ways it can go. One of which is, depending on how it happens, you know, you can have, because you've got a lot of dilution, maybe you're better off with standards. But if you're carrying a big sediment load into the creek, then you're in worse shape. And that's why one of the things we're trying to do is address surface water. One of the things we need to get in place are more of the sedimentation basins to try and get that sediment out of the system, out of the storm water before it gets to the creek. So I don't have a number on percentage. I don't know that anybody could give you an exact percentage of.
I don't want exact, just a sense, like, is it a whole bunch of too March when, you know, when there's thaw, or is there?
Snow melt, we've looked at snow melt, you know, that's a part of it. You know, rain events, you know, storm events in spring and summer.
Does the past couple of days qualify as a storm event?
It is a storm event. It's not a huge one, but we continue to do some of the stormwater monitoring there as well to see what loads are being carried. Part of this implementation of the surface water stuff is getting some things in place, you know, and then evaluating further to see if there are other areas where we can get some additional benefit from additional.
Go ahead.
You said that you believe that the remedy chosen for this area is protective of human health. How are you protecting this from that groundwater pollute? Is that contained, or is it, as the data is suggesting now, there's more water flowing through faster than we thought? How are you protecting us from that?
By cutting off the exposure. I mean, that's the reason that we implemented the controlled groundwater area.
You can't demonstrate that in any way.
That you're not drinking the groundwater?
No, that you're cutting it off. You just said that earlier.
No, cutting off the pathway from exposure. Now,
It's staying there, it's staying right underneath the Parrot Tailings, and it's
well, groundwater is always, contaminated groundwater is always, generally is always moving. The question is it getting to places where either a person or the environment could be affected at concentrations that would, you know, concentrations above standards? In other words, is it getting to a drinking water well above standards so that somebody's exposed to it? Is it expanding beyond the area of the controlled groundwater area? Is it getting to the creek at concentrations that would cause us to not meet water quality standards? And so we're still working on getting there. We're still trying to get the remedy implemented. And so we're not there yet. We got to get the remedy implemented. We've got to finish getting the remedy implemented, and we have to get things in place. And then the monitoring will show us whether or not we're being protected. We think it will. And then that's why we made the decision we did. But we've still got to finish getting it in place, getting all the elements of it.
however, we have the monitoring in place around our TI zone.
Right. To show that it's not expanding.
That it's not expanding.
New information has come to light since 2006, and I'm sure you made what you thought was a prudent decision in 2006 with respect to the remedy. If you had, in 2006, all